Hey there, Wasteland Wanderers. It's your favorite military history professor, wagging his chin again with this continued look into the NCR's history over this holotape lecture series. We ended our last lecture with a more than warm welcome with the end of the Mojave campaign. But just as any hot war, a cold one is close to follow. And that's in more ways than one, with a bit of some unfinished business needing to be taken care of. Now you see, in the aftermath of the decisive clash at Hoover Dam, the NCR's Cazador Company, just barely getting a well-needed R&R session at Camp McCarran, found themselves thrust into yet another theater of conflict. The icy expanse of Oregon. Now, at the early stages of this over-eager Part 2 of the conflict, a few rangers on loan for the Department of State were out scouting the Oregon frontier for potential settlement. The NCR weren't eager this time to expand out too much after learning from the Mojave, and thought about starting slow, planting the seeds of an eventual planned out and steady expansion over the course of 2 decades into Oregon with a few frontiersmen to scout out some potential territory, once the Mojave modernized its infrastructure. If anything, the Rangers' assignment was kind of a much-needed break from the intense operations, heading out into the wilderness and doing some hunting, smoking, and good-time frontiering. Well, before it fell to absolute shit once the Rangers found the targets they were also sent out there to look for, to see if the rumors were true. Legion forces whom were maneuvering through eastern Oregon. Right around August of 2282, Lanius had full control of the Legion with the death of the Bullhead Supreme Caesar himself. Needless to say, while he had been talked down from staying in the Mojave, the burning vengeance of a steel barbarian wouldn't be calmed so easily. With a vengeance on his mind, the NCR foresaw he'd remain a threat, and accurately predicted his attempts to flank NCR forces. So the NCR hadn't sat idle with the remnants of their enemies still out there. Thus, they tasked the newly blooded 16th Cazador Company again with intercepting the ambitious northern expedition led by the legate. In a way, playing the role of a giant symbolic middle finger to the Legion, sending the ones who captured Caesar and all to finish the big brute off. And Lanius, with some props to him, had made some gains too, quickly moving through tribal and new Canaanite-occupied lands, heading up along the Snake River Plain into Oregon country. It was a weary state of affairs, but quite a lot of vets were still eager to finally settle the score for good against the Legion. In time, Cazador eventually embarked on a treacherous journey through the untamed wilderness of the Pacific Northwest at the go-ahead of Army High Command. But as travel and mobilization can be a real logistical bitch to organize, it took about 3 months till the Northern NCR Army dispatch finally arrived in October of 2282, and the nuclear winter all the soldiers had been wishing for chose to arrive early to meet them. As they ventured deeper into the frigid heartland, The biting winds of nuclear winter snow swept across the desolate landscape, casting a pall of frost over the region. Despite the bone-chilling cold and the specter of uncertainty looming overhead, the common soldier craved retribution. This wasn't a war on all sides to establish territory like last time. This was one task fueled by making one final point on who had the right to exist. This, kids, was a war of extermination. Arriving in the desolate reaches of Grant County, Oregon, Cazador Company immediately found their quarter. Grant County Regional Airport, or what remained of it, as it eked out into nothing but a godforsaken patch of dirt and concrete, a battleground where dreams went to die. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, many couldn't help but feel the bitter taste of disappointment lingering in the air. It was supposed to be the NCR's first major victory against Lanius's Legion, a decisive blow to kickstart the NCR Northern Legion War, but instead all they got was a bloody stalemate and a runway riddled with craters that crippled any large-scale air operations. The morning of October 14th dawned with a sense of grim determination, the kind that gnaws at your gut and settles like a lead weight in your chest. NCR orders were clear: seize the airfield, eliminate Legion leadership, and establish a foothold for further operations. Easy enough on paper, and a damn nightmare in reality. The Legion conscripts may have been green as hell, but they fought like cornered rats, backed by surprise artillery units that pounded some of the infantry into submission. New questions immediately followed. Since when did the Legion start to modernize? And where the fuck were they getting their supplies? Despite Cazador's best efforts, they couldn't break through Legion defenses fast enough for a lightning attack on Lanius's main camp. Every step forward was met with a hail of gunfire. Every inch of ground gained paid for in blood. And when the NCR finally wrested control of the airport from their grasp, it was a hollow victory. The runway was a mess, cratered beyond repair, rendering it useless for any large-scale aerial operations except for squadron gun runs and transport duty. The NCR may have won the battle, but the war was far from over. And as the NCR christened the blood-soaked earth as Camp Grant, many combat reporters at the time couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far worse. And it seems they called fate's bluff with uncanny accuracy. The relentless onslaught of nuclear winter brought with it a myriad of logistical challenges, as the NCR struggled to maintain supply lines amidst the harsh elements that froze up many transport engines. But honestly, most weren't really surprised. Different landscape, sure, but these were people who got their start with the logistical fuckery of the Mojave campaign. Same shit, different day. And with the fate of the Oregon frontier hanging in the balance, the stage was set for a harrowing set of battles that would test the mettle of both sides in the twilight era of the Legion's dominance. Despite their numerical advantage, the NCR found themselves locked in a grueling battle of attrition, as Legion forces had learned from the Mojave, and a cold hatred steeled them, which ran just as cold as the white ground itself. The Legion had reformed, still eager to stab and cut with their swords and spears, but this time, they were more than willing to modernize to get their pound of flesh. This had become one of the harshest winters west of the Rockies Mountains that anyone had ever seen since the first nuclear winter. With each passing day, the frigid battleground bore witness to brutal combat that brought crimes against humanity, as the bitter cold served as a hateful puppet master to the events that unfolded. Hate was the rule of the day, and the horrific atrocities and mass killings buried under those frost-covered boneyards still haunt the land and the ones who survived as we speak. While I prefer to give details for true historical accuracy, let me just say that the primary documents I've read and collected have been deemed too graphic for California broadcast standards. Thus, this dark period I'll have to gloss over. Alas, amidst the unforgiving wilderness of Oregon, the NCR found itself plunged into a showdown that had it acting like quasi-raiders. And for a godforsaken campaign, let me tell you, it was a clusterfuck in expectations. The NCR kinda went into this one with the ideal of keeping it short, making the NCR grunts raid local territories and live off the land to supplement themselves. But those Legion bastards managed to get their hands on firearms, tanks, and artillery, courtesy of some new shadowy outfit called the Gunners. Most in NCR high commands thought they were mercenaries and even considered paying them off. But in actuality, they were remnants of the old US military, and they were more trouble than they were worth, being interested in picking fights like the Legion, even deciding to poke at the NCR with a few skirmishes and insurgencies of their own, leading to the opening of another front that we'll get to shortly. Either way, supplies were scarce, morale was lower than a snake's belly, and every casualty was hit like a gut punch. Trying to send reinforcements up north was like pissing in the wind, slow, messy, and downright pointless. And to tell you about leadership this time, historians and soldiers alike will give it to them, they actually tried to keep up, keeping the realms of politics out of it, as for once there was a silent understanding in place. General Oliver, the newly minted politician, and his backroom lackeys backed up any military requests for this situation. He had seen what the Legion could do firsthand, and knew that their existence remained a threat to us all. So the mandate was set, and we speculate his full support was given in a meeting with High Command over dinner at the Tops on the New Vegas Strip. The event only noted by one over-eager journalist that took a picture of this group of NCR brass entering the Tops a month before Cazador's deployment. The exact words we'll never know, but the intent was clear through Oliver's pardoning of alleged war crime accusations later on in the campaign. Take out the Legion by any means necessary. Yet, at the turn of the new year of 2283, when the NCR noticed a slight drop in freezing winds and warmer temperatures for a window of 2 weeks, their eyes were set on picking apart one target in particular. On January the 8th, the NCR launched Operation Hannibal, which attempted to punch through an overextended front line around the Legion's 12th cohort, the goal being to isolate and pick apart the isolated and struggling Legion contingent as NCR Command picked up on the dwindling supply lines and growing infighting between the Centurions of the cohort. The Legion set up a mobile defense of smaller units that were to hold towns and camps until supporting armor arrived. From the NCR bridgehead at Crooked River Railroad, the NCR 1st Regiment attacked the 8th Century in a divide-and-conquer strike. On the 19th of January, with 5 of the Century disintegrating and 3 on the back foot, Lanius ordered the battered cohort to withdraw to new lines. The fighting force forced a total re-evaluation of the Legion's situation, as the 12th cohort's dissolution would signify a major cut into the Legion territory that would allow for wider encirclement that the Legion just couldn't defend against with their dwindling supplies and means of paying the gunners for equipment. Sensing that this was the last chance for a breakout offensive to escape confinement, Centurion Quintus deserted his post to plead with Lanius on January the 20th for one final offensive to get these overextended legionnaires out from the NCR's grasp. 3 days later, the Centurion returned to his post with broken bones and a crown of screws in his skull, his body scarred with a 3-word mandate to all legionnaires that would see their returning leader: fight and die. The Legion's attempt to break through to Camp Grant and march on California was abandoned, and the Northern Expedition was ordered to pull back closer to the mountains of Dixie Butte. The 12th cohort now was beyond all hope of Legion relief. Lanius's leadership of the Legion sought not to relieve them, but to get them to fight on for as long as possible, so as to tie up the NCR forces. The aim was to win as much time as possible to withdraw forces from other areas of the front line, and to rush troops to form a new bulwark that would be able, in some measure, to check the NCR counteroffensive into Legion territory that they had anticipated. The victory brought the NCR a wealth of knowledge in turn, with the capture of important Legion documents that told the NCR a lot more about the Legion's new friends. But we'll get back to those Green Army bandits later in this lecture. The Hannibal offensive had been a promising gamble, and it would not end until the Legion had been broken against the cliffs of the Rocky Mountains. The collapse of the Legion wasn't some grand, heroic saga. It was a messy, brutal affair, like most things in war history. Dixie Butte, once thought to be an impenetrable fortress, crumbled under the relentless assault of the NCR's combined arms. The soldiers on the ground could feel it in their bones long before it happened. Supposedly, they knew the Legion's days were numbered and were just waiting for the inevitable to unfold. The NCR may have struggled with air logistics, but that didn't stop them from bringing in tanks to counter the Legion's armor. It was a desperate move, fueled by desperation and a grim determination to survive. Keeping those tanks operational was a nightmare in itself. The bitter cold of the mountains froze engines solid, turning them into little more than useless chunks of metal. But somehow, through sheer willpower and the ingenuity of ice picks, they managed to keep them running long enough to make a difference. On February the 4th, the fight had begun. The fighting was brutal, with every inch of mountainous uphill ground bitterly contested for 4 straight days of combat. Gun runs and tank shells tore through the air, leaving destruction in their wake. Cazador Company found themselves right in the thick of it, engaging in mountain warfare against an enemy that seemed hell-bent on their destruction, as the NCR's armored division granted them enough diversion time to get close enough to make a difference. Hell, NCR's mobile mortar sections were even used to soften up defenses, paving the way for infantry to advance as Rangers, Recon, and Heavy Infantry conducted deep strike parachute raids to disable Legion artillery. It was gritty, bloody work with no room for heroics or glory. Just survival. And then, after 4 days of relentless combat, the Legion finally broke. Lanius, their so-called great leader, proved to be nothing more than a liability. His blind rage and incompetence had cost them dearly, and even his own people turned against him. Volpes and Coulter, always the cunning one, saw an opportunity to seize power for himself. He deemed Lanius a false successor, and rallied his own forces amidst the shattering empire to challenge Lanius's right to rule. And so, amidst the chaos and bloodshed, the Legion tore itself apart from within. The retreat followed into an ongoing civil war, with many factions appearing who now consider themselves the true successors to Caesar's throne. Needless to say, the NCR were glad they didn't need to chase their enemy. As for the NCR, the soldiers of Cazador who had fought so hard for victory found that there was little cause for celebration. They had survived, yes, but this campaign was different from the Mojave. The scars of war ran deep, both physically and mentally, and there was no escaping them with what the cold atrocities and brutality of this front had brought. Many friends were lost, and the biting cold had driven many to do things they had never considered before in the name of survival. And so, as Cazador Company returned a hardened unit, they watched the Legion tear itself apart in a twisted parody of justice. But even the veterans in their memoirs and primary source documents couldn't help but feel a sense of bitter resignation. Victory had come at a price, and at the end, the fighting wasn't even over, as October to February had just been another prolonged journey to the March campaign with no rest in sight. With the northern expedition vanquished and the Legion's forces scattered to the winds, a period of uneasy calm descended upon the war-torn region of Oregon. As NCR intelligence delved deeper into the mystery surrounding the Legion's newfound arsenal, a startling revelation came to light with the discoveries from the 12th cohort. The discovery of a document linking the weapons to a base near the heart of NCR territory, which sent shockwaves rippling through the halls of power, sparked fears of a potential new enemy lurking close to the Republic's borders. Determined to root out the source of raw shock, the NCR High Command wasted no time in dispatching Cazador Company on a daring mission to unseat the gunners, as they had first-hand experience with dealing with them these last few months. Now, quick geography lesson for some of you all at home. Off the coast of the Boneyard, here in glorious California, are a set of islands referred to pre-war as the Channel Islands. Here, NCR scout planes discovered a large presence of these gunners. Deciding they may cause a threat in the future, and hate-hid for the aid they had provided to the Legion against the NCR, the NCR High Command ordered Cazador Company to take over the islands and wipe the gunners off the map. From the frigid and frozen wasteland to the choking heat of the tropics, the rugged terrain of the Channel Islands loomed large on the horizon to the beaten-down Cazador Company. with the lush jungles concealing a host of deadly adversaries that laid in wait for them. Amidst the dense foliage of the Channel Islands, Cazador Company found themselves locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the elusive gunners, their every move shadowed by the specter of imminent danger, chemical warfare, and traps hidden among the trees, as Cazador had to add jungle warfare to their ever-growing survival list. With the backing of the newly formed NCR Navy, Cazador Company launched their assault on the Channel Islands. As their ships cut through the choppy waters, the soldiers braced themselves for the impending confrontation, their minds focused on the task at hand. With the roar of the engines drowning out the sound of crashing waves, they approached the shores of Santa Cruz, their adrenaline coursing through their veins as they prepared to face the enemy head-on. As the ramparts of the pre-war airfield loomed into view, Cazador Company sprang into action, their boots hitting the sandy beaches with a resounding thud with an amphibious assault. With weapons at the ready and their resolve steeled against the looming threat, they advanced inland, their eyes scanning the dense foliage for any sign of movement. The jungle seemed to come alive around them, the eerie silence broken only by rustle of leaves and the distant cries of unseen creatures lurking in the shadows and the crack of bullets coming from nearly every direction. Despite the treacherous terrain and the relentless onslaught of enemy fire, Cazador Company pressed forward with unwavering determination to gain a foothold on the island and finally achieve what they couldn't in the Northern Campaign. They would secure that damned airfield and have an uncontested staging ground. But funnily enough, most hadn't even expected there to be any sort of jungle terrain whatsoever. Heck, pre-war records of those very islands took note of the absolute lack of trees. However, the islands they found were covered in a thick jungle-like brush. Reportedly, a pre-war research operation was conducted through a joint research initiative between the US Army and Vault-Tec. Apparently, they had been testing on methods of food production. However, it seems through recovered documents that said plant growth had leaked and led to a chain of islands being covered in fauna. Apparently, the US Army deemed it too risky as civilians and personnel alike at the time experienced growing sickness and halted production there as the symptoms grew devastating, but were ultimately still treatable as more extreme specimens were still contained. Needless to say, weird science had its day in the sun, as for once, the first amphibious assault conducted by a joint operation between the NCR Navy and the 1st Infantry Regiment proved successful. As the NCR forces set their sights on Anacapa Island, they braced themselves for another grueling campaign amidst the dense jungle terrain. The island's thick vegetation obscured their vision, making every step forward a potential encounter with danger. With the echoes of gunfire ringing in their ears, Cazador Company advanced cautiously, their senses heightened as they scoured the landscape for any sign of elusive gunners, as the NCR turned to their new reliance on air assault capabilities amidst the dense forestry. And like all slithering beasts amidst the dense foliage, the gunners lay in wait, their guerrilla tactics proving to be a formidable challenge for the advancing NCR troops. Ambushes and hit-and-run attacks tested the soldiers' mettle, pushing them to their limits as they fought to gain control of the island, as they were met with tunnel compounds, tree snipers, and well-defended command posts. Through sheer grit and perseverance, the NCR forces gradually gained ground. their relentless assault driving the gunners back with each passing day. And when the dust finally settled, Anacapa Island stood as a testament to their unwavering resolve in dealing with such an elusive target. However, the gunners were only probing before they themselves committed even harder to kicking the NCR out of their territory, as the NCR took Anacapa Island and planted themselves right on the gunners' well-worn couch. With Anacapa Island secured, the NCR turned their attention to the larger and more heavily defended Santa Rosa Island. As Cazador Company prepared for the next phase of their campaign, they braced themselves for the toughest battle yet. The dense jungle and rugged terrain posed significant challenges, with the gunners entrenched deeper within the island's interior, ready to defend their stronghold at all costs with even more of their favorite toys to bring out of the toy box. Chlorine gas and many more chemical concoctions would come into play, as the gunners seemed to relish in fucking with the natural order of things on principle, as gas mask sales soared back in California to match the demand to handle the fumes that could burn, bubble, and boil the flesh and brain of any NCR soldier that was unfortunate enough to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, being covered in choking gas if the punji sticks or IEDs hadn't gotten to them first. As the NCR forces made landfall on Santa Rosa, they were met with fierce resistance from the entrenched gunners. The island's natural defenses proved ample cover for the enemy, allowing them to launch devastating ambushes and counterattacks against the advancing NCR troops. Amidst the chaos of battles that easily lasted weeks, with an enemy that could appear and disappear with a snap, Cazador Company fought tooth and nail, growing ever paranoid at the faintest of sounds of the coming of night, as the jungle grew deadlier and the ominous dark. While the campaign started on March 3rd, by April 2nd, NCR forces closed in on the gunner stronghold, as the territory had luckily been much smaller to navigate than all previous campaigns. For once, Cazador Company were definitely better equipped than ever before, but it hadn't quite made it easier, as the intensity of the fighting reached its peak. Both sides fought with an almost psychotic ferocity, each determined to emerge victorious in the battle for Santa Rosa Island. But the NCR troops refused to be deterred by the mounting casualties or the formidable defenses of the enemy, as island hopping and small unit tactics took a much larger role than ever. This in turn led to some of the greater reforms that would affect the NCR's military to this day, as these lessons would be implemented in the military academy's training of small unit tactics and communications that now grant squads more autonomy than ever before. While the gunners had the equipment, they definitely lacked the motivation that the Legion had, as the gunners grew overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught of the NCR forces, and found themselves pushed to the brink of defeat. But while it had been a turning tide, the NCR had been bogged down for too long, and the necessity of this fight started to grow louder amongst the government back home as new problems started to make themselves known to us. After securing key strategic positions on Santa Rosa, Cazador Company turned its sights towards the pre-war airfield and final stronghold of Clap Springs, a vital hub for the gunners' operations on the island. Situated at the foot of a rugged hillside, the town was heavily fortified, with barricades and defensive emplacements manned by determined enemy fighters. As the NCR forces advanced towards their final objective, they faced fierce resistance from entrenched gunner positions, forcing them to wage a grueling battle for every inch of ground. Each street became a battleground, every building a potential death trap, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the war-torn streets of Clap Springs, the battle reached its climax. With the enemy's defenses crumbling under the relentless onslaught of the NCR forces, victory seemed within grasp. But just as the tide of battle appeared to turn decisively in the favor of the Republic, the gunners unleashed their most devastating weapon yet. A massive ordnance air blast, MOAB bomb for short, dropped from a pre-war aircraft. The explosion tore through the heart of Clap Springs, unleashing a wave of destruction that decimated the NCR's ranks and turned the tide of battle as an unprecedented amount of casualties occurred and nearly wiped out the Cazador Company to the last man. Yet, as fate held no favor to the men and women who fought in Cazador Company, they were forced to retreat, their mission to capture the Channel Islands ending in bitter defeat. In the aftermath of the devastating MOAB blast, the surviving members of Cazador Company found themselves in disarray, their ranks decimated and their morale shattered. As they regrouped amidst the ruins of Clap Springs, the full extent of the losses they had suffered became painfully clear. Comrades lay wounded or dead, their sacrifices a stark reminder of the brutal reality of war that grew more questionable in necessity as the rumblings of this devastation reached the political circuit. Amidst the chaos and confusion, the soldiers struggled to come to terms with the harsh truth that victory had slipped through their fingers after the pain they suffered to get to this point. The new tasks elsewhere came calling, as their time on the islands were done. With heavy hearts and cracked wills, the remnants of Cazador Company began their arduous retreat from the Channel Islands, their spirits weighed down by the crushing weight of defeat. As they boarded transport vessels bound for the mainland, they cast one last mournful gaze back at the smoldering ruins of Clap Springs, a poignant reminder of the cost of their sacrifices. As the ship sailed away from the Channel Islands, leaving behind the devastation wrought by the MOAB blast, the soldiers of Cazador Company found solace in the bonds of camaraderie forged in the crucible of battle. After all, many new faces joined in this campaign who would go on to have a significant impact in the years to come for the storied history of Cazador Company. Though the scars of their defeat would linger, many lessons had been learned that would later help Cazador Company earn its place as a storied expeditionary force. As they looked towards the familiar Californian horizon, towards an uncertain future fraught with challenges and hardships, the question of if their actions had been in vain fills the somber silence of those ships heading back home. And here, I think this quote from the retired Second Lieutenant Graff of Alpha Company kinda explains the emotional mindset of a few of those who had survived those two campaigns best. Quote, "The same cycle of violence, greed, and power struggles continued unabated. Many NCR soldiers had fought and bled for what? A fleeting moment of victory and a devastating defeat in a seemingly never-ending conflict. In the end, it wasn't just the Legion that crumbled under the weight of its own hubris. It was our illusions of heroism, glory, and righteousness that shattered into a million pieces. We had seen firsthand the ugly truth of total, unrestrained war of annihilation, the senseless destruction, the needless suffering, the loss of innocence. And yet, despite all our efforts, we were no closer to peace. War, I realized, was not a force of change, but a force of stagnation. It kept us locked in an endless cycle of violence, forever repeating the same mistakes, the same atrocities. It stripped away our humanity, leaving behind only hollow shells of what we once were. And as we looked out upon the smoldering ruins of Clap Springs, only few of us knew deep in our hearts that nothing would ever truly change. Because war never changes.